Resume the recording. Thank you. I'm a certified speech and language pathologist. I worked in the schools for over 19 years before coming to Lincoln Intermediate Unit, and I did work some other settings before that. My contact information is on there, including my email address. That's what it is currently. My phone number, which you can reach me by phone or text. And I also have a Twitter account that I do try to post on fairly regularly if you're interested in following me. Just since it's a small group here, just to get an idea of who you guys are, what your positions are, if you can either unmute yourself or post it in the chat, I'd appreciate that, so I can know who I'm talking to. School psych, okay. Anyone else? I know we have one SLP here, so hi, Mommy. We SLPs all know each other. At least everyone thinks that. Okay, TAAS, TAES. School psych. I've seen a lot of school psychs at this conference the last couple of days. I'm not going to call anyone out if you choose not to respond, but thank you for those of you, just so I have an idea of who I'm talking to. If you watched Tanya's introductory message any of the 3 days, you've already seen these Zoom webinar meeting norms, so I'm not going to spend a large amount of time going over them. Engagements are a priority. It's hard virtually. Again, I know some people don't feel comfortable unmuting themselves and talking. Some people also aren't comfortable posting in the chat. I know that engagement looks different for everyone. I honor everyone's perspectives, and I assume I have good intentions with the information I'm presenting you, and that you do have good intentions because you chose to attend this. Act 48 credits, we get, those are, I'm talking too much the last couple of days. Those are awarded upon the completion of the evaluation, which is due July 31st. And remember, if you're one of the first 100 that registered and you get your evaluations done by July 31st, you will get a copy of the book from Dr. Young. So the outcomes for today's webinar, I feel like the title probably summed it up pretty well, but participants, I'm going to talk about how, when, and why to document your consideration of assistive technology in students' IEPs. And I'm going to also just talk about a little bit, just because this has come up more and more, it seems, is documenting any information related to any requests for assistive technology evaluations. Again, that's not necessarily, because it is related to the IEP. And that just, I find that's coming up more and more often within districts, that they're getting those requests. So I'm just gonna start, hold on a second, I have too many windows open. This is the legal definition of assistive technology according to federal law, which is obviously put out by PDE. I'm not gonna sit here and read this to you because you are all capable of reading, but it's a pretty lengthy definition of what AT is and who it supports. I do have a link there. I thought someone told me this link was no longer valid. Oh no, there it is. That's the legal link, just so if you wanted to see the resource where that came from. I'm going to give you the short version. It's any device, equipment, or service that improves learning and capabilities of students with disabilities. And that definition alone is intentionally vague because assistive technology options are so broad. It's not just an iPad with an AAC app, which falls obviously under assistive technology because that's a device that can obviously improve communication skills. Well, regardless of what it is, and in the picture there are different examples of AT shown, the goal is for us as educators teaching all students to become as independent as possible with learning, communicating, interacting, and working regardless of disability. And of course, assistive technology can help us with that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what assistive technology is, because that way we know what needs to go in the IEP. And again, just given some of your backgrounds, you're probably familiar with this, so just bear with me. I just put this in there. I'm sure you probably already know this, but to reinforce it, assistive technology, AT, must be considered for all students with IEPs. even your speech-only kid who's working on our assistive technology must be considered. It is, we're going to get into the IEP document a little bit later. So just something to think about. Do you, because there's what I find that's happening, and just even back as my days as a school-based SLP and now doing what I do, there's a lot of kids who assistive technology is not really considered for or thought about as, oh, that kid doesn't, AT isn't something they need. And it's just never even considered. Nobody ever thinks that maybe that child could benefit from AT. So there's a lot of students who may benefit from AT that aren't getting it. So this is one population I see a lot that people don't think about. Students who struggle to read or do math on grade level. Over the years, I've worked with many, many students who are in learning support, and rarely did any of those students ever have AT in their IEP, or was AT ever even really thought about as an option. Our sessions are all recorded, and if you were in attendance Monday, I do a presentation on AT for students who have needs in the area of literacy, and I did an AT for students in the area of math. So absolutely, there's assistive technology available for students who are not reading or doing math on grade level. You're thinking of your learning support kids, for example. There may be populations that we don't think about for AT. You know, I think when people think AT, they think of, you know, your kids with significant physical disabilities, like your multi-disabled students or your students with autism, supportive, significant communication needs. But that's not those aren't the only populations that benefit. Students who have difficulty with the fine motor aspects of writing. Now, you might have some kids with some OT needs that AT probably should be considered for, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Blind or visually impaired. Now, those populations are definitely ones that, you know, your BVI teachers definitely are considering AT, and there's likely AT in most of those IEPs. Deaf and hearing impaired, same thing. The students using FM system or hearing aids, they likely already have AT in their IEPs. Students with physical disabilities, if students can't use their hands due to physical or motoric differences, you know, your kids who have CP, for example, and need to use switches, they likely already have AT in their IEP. Students who are unable to speak or are unintelligible. Some of those kids, obviously, communication, AAC, augmentative alternative communication, falls under the umbrella of assistive technology. But all of these students may benefit from assistive technology. Again, some of these ones at the bottom, yeah, these four, okay, we are typically considering AT for those kids. Maybe these ones at the top, we are not thinking about it as often. I'm just going to talk a little bit about AT tools, because again, I think a lot of times people think, oh, they're using an iPad, that's AT, but they're not thinking about some of the other tools the students are using that could be considered AT. No tech. You don't need anything other than the user to get it to work. And I'm going to list some examples. And maybe you have kids who are using these. Slant boards, highlighting tapes, pencil grips, communication boards, again, graph paper for math problems, a stylus. You have kids who are using a pencil grip and they need it to be able to write legibly. They probably should have AT checked in their IEP. And I knew tons of kids who had pencil grips recommended by the OT, but nowhere did it say they were using AT in the IEP. But by definition, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, if it counts as AT or not, a pencil grip absolutely could be included. Just because that's a common one, I'm using that as an example. Low tech, I really need to change a slide. In the AT community, we're really trying to get away from using low tech, because a lot of people, which never occurred to me, but apparently this was an issue, a lot of people were assuming low tech AT is for low kids, low ability students, and that isn't true. They're really trying to get away from that and use more light tech to mid tech. I'm gonna actually write myself a note. I copied this slide deck from from a different slide deck, and I forgot to change that. So I actually will. Those are things that need minimal technology, such as batteries to work. And I'm gonna tell you, you might see people using different definitions than what I'm providing here. This is just how I'm going to refer to it. Some examples, again, your OT things, battery powered scissors, Go Talk 20s. If you don't know what that is an AAC, a light tech AAC device that runs on a AA battery. A large button calculator, again, any type of special calculators, those would be your light or mid tech. The ones we're most familiar with in terms of AT tools that we think of, yes, that kid uses AT, are those high-tech ones, those things that use advanced technology to work. And I just list some examples. Apps on the iPad, Chromebook apps and extensions, AAC, any AAC devices. But if you have kids who use Bookshare, that can be considered assistive technology. Sorry, my chair is squeaking here. So I made up a little chart here for you to look at. Is what my student is using considered assistive technology? No or yes? Again, that'll be important when we think about checking those boxes on page 5. If it would fall under no, then it's a no. If it falls under yes, then you should be checking that box on page 5. And if you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of page 5 in the IEP, we're going to look at an IEP in a couple minutes, but just keep that in mind. So no, if the student can perform the task without the tool, it is not AT. It's yes if they can't do it. So for example, something that a student can't do the task without the tool. You have a student who's nonverbal. They need that iPad with lamp on it to communicate. Absolutely, it's assistive tech. An example of no, you can think of in your own life. We all use assistive technology or things that are designed as assistive technology, but we're not using them as AT. For example, if you ever use voice texting, I know I do that all the time. That is technically assistive technology for somebody who cannot type. However, for those of us who do not have a disability and can type on the phone just fine, we just do it for convenience because it's faster, it's easier. But it is not assistive technology for us because we can text just fine without it. Another thing under no, the supports, again, whether that AAC device or any of the mid-tech and the no-tech AAC is not, the student is using, is not related to the student's disability, or the student does not have a disability. And again, I'm not saying not a 504 kid because they can fall under, they're eligible for AT too. I'm talking about a kid in Reg Ed. And I'm surprised at the number of times that has come up. Somebody says, oh, we want this particular AT, for example, I'll use a LiveScribe pen because that's been coming up in Reg Ed a lot lately. We want the student to have a LiveScribe pen, and then they're like, well, they don't have a disability. It's not assistive tech. That is not in my scope of practice of what services I give. That becomes just an instructional technology tool. It is not assistive technology. Again, or suppose it's a kid who's just a speech-only kid who's seen for articulation. You know, they have a lisp, they can't say R, they have sound errors, but you know, they need speech to text because they can't, or text to speech because they don't read on grade level. They might need that and they could benefit from that. However, it's not something you list in the IEP because it is not assistive technology because it is, if it's not related to the disability. But if the supports are based on the disability and are necessary, then yes, you have a kid who's diagnosed with a learning disability in reading, they very well may need text to speech, absolutely be assistive technology for them. And it's so funny because this comes up in IEPs all the time, or even special design instruction falls under this too. If it, quote, would be nice for them to have that, it is not assistive technology. You either need it or you don't. Just like when you're thinking about writing your special design instruction, oh, it would be really nice if they had this, this, and this in their SDI. If they don't need it, it should not be in there. And I've been in many IEP meetings where that's come up, where the parents think, well, this would be nice, or the teacher thinks this would be nice. Would be nice does not mean need. Yes, again, the bottom right corner there, if the student needs assistive technology to make progress in the classroom or in the curriculum and or on their IEP goals, then yes, what they're using is assistive technology. If they cannot progress, hold on, I see your question in the chat. Would you also say SDI is related to disability? Oh, as a speech pathologist, I know what you're saying. I feel like it should be. However, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't an IEP first. This might be the kind of situation you're referring to because I know you're an SLP. You have a speech-only kid. Maybe they're just like I said, one of those kids, I'm just using articulation because it's just an example of that typically wouldn't be an AT kid. Their special design instruction, they're like, well, they need extended time on tests, or they need small group for tests. That has absolutely nothing to do with their disability. So no. Now I'm thinking though, suppose you have a student who has language processing difficulties. Then some of those accommodations could be related. Does that make sense? Some of those accommodations then could certainly be related. If they have language processing difficulties, then maybe you do need some of those testing accommodations. But if it's like your straightforward artic kid, they shouldn't just be throwing SDI that would be nice or they think the kid needs. Then they need to do further evaluation to see if there's another disability other than, for example, the articulation. Again, your kids with the language impairments, your specific language impairments, they might have some other SDI though. But yes, I just have seen that happen just as a school-based SLP, you know, you have an R kid and well, they need extra testing time. That has nothing to do with the fact that they can't say R. So it should not be put in there. So I'm sure you've all missed seeing IEPs over the summer. Here's the special considerations page. When I was saying page 5, this is the page I was referring to because it's page 5 in the IEP. And anybody who writes IEPs probably knew what I was talking about. And I apologize if you are not someone who writes IEPs and weren't sure. These are all boxes that, and it's right there. They must be considered. It's right there up here at the top. Special considerations must be must be considered when developing an IEP. That's for every single kid, not just your kids who are in multi-disabilities classrooms, or not just your kids who have physical disabilities. Every single kid, you need to answer every single question. Again, blind and visually impaired, deaf and hearing impaired, communication needs, that's where your speech and language kids are. There it is, I put the arrow next to it. Does a student need assistive technology devices and services? And then limited English proficiency. Now, I can gladly say I'm guilty of this, but, you know, especially for my speech only kids, I would be lying if I said I didn't do an IEP meeting where I did this. Is a student blind or visually impaired? No. Deaf or hearing impaired? No. Communication needs? That's checked yes because they have speech and saying this at a meeting. Does the student have assistive technology, need assistive technology devices and services? No. Do they have limited English proficiency? No. Okay, let's go to the next page of the IEP. I'm sure some of you are guilty of doing that. If I've done it, and I've been in many IEP meetings where plenty of other case managers have absolutely done this list just like that, but you shouldn't, because these things all need to be considered. And the thing is, by saying it needs to be considered, it really should be documented proof, to prove that you considered it. Again, thinking for our due processes and, you know, what a litigious society we're in, you want to cover all your bases. You want to make sure you're addressing that this was considered. You want documentation of that. And I'm going to talk about, again, I think you need to document. I always had a blurb in there from the nurse to say hearing and vision was within normal limits, especially for your speech kiddos. I always had obviously if they were speech students, which those are the kids I was writing IEPs for, they all had me. Of course, I talked about that in present levels, but my district, we always had to put a statement in there about English proficiency. We'd have to say, if they were just an English, you know, student is a native English speaker, English is spoken in the home, student is fluent in English, or if they were bilingual, we would, you know, say, you know, Spanish is a language at home, student is, you know, bilingual, is fluent in English and Spanish, speaks English in the school setting. We addressed all those, and they were written in our present levels, but nowhere did my special ed directors I ever worked for ever talk about, well, you need to document AT, just like the fact that we have to say why we put no for blind, deaf, you know, and limited English. Nowhere did anyone ever say, well, you should document why you put no for AT. I'm going to suggest that you do. And we're going to talk about this. Which box do I check? Yes or no? This comes up. I've had many staff members and special ed teachers asking me about this. And here's why it's confusing. PA doesn't give us guidelines and say, for AT, okay, check yes if this, check no if this. Pennsylvania does not provide us that information as to whether or not you check it yes. So you're going to have to do what the IEP team, it's not just an individual, the IEP team has to do what they think is best. Again, and our goal is to write legally defensible IEPs that are meeting students' needs. So when in doubt, I would suggest check yes. So I kind of try to put some guidelines under yes, check it, no, you don't need to check it. And you can certainly comment in the chat or unmute yourself about your opinions, or if you disagree, agree or disagree, because there is no legal mandate. These are just recommendations. So checking yes, we'll go over the yes side first. Again, if a student already has assistive technology, you know, you're doing an annual IEP and the student already has assistive technology in place and it's effective, it's sufficient. I'm just going to use AAC a lot because I'm an SLP by training. So the student already has, you know, a Tobii Dynavox with eye gaze and they have it, it's effective. You're not going to change it. That's a good communication system for them. Check yes, obviously. That sounds obvious, but I'm just trying to cover it in there. And then the opposite of that is no, the student does not need AT devices of support to make progress in the curriculum or his or her IEP goals. And that sounds vague, but you know, you have a kid who has, I don't know, a learning disability in math and they're making progress on the curriculum and their goals without any assistive technology in place and they're doing well, then you would check no, or you know, they don't need it. Then the last two is where it's kind of the gray area. Again, there are no guidelines. This is just what I'm going to suggest that may be useful for you. Yes, suppose your IEP team has trialed some kind of AT, which AT trials happen a lot. Then you're going to revise that student's IEP to add the AT. So again, suppose I'm going to use AAC as a trial. So you trialed a bunch of AAC devices. You're getting lamp on the iPad, you're getting it from a charity like Variety, it's getting donated, or maybe the parents are getting it, but they're gonna send it to school. Okay, you need to revise that IEP as soon as they get the device. Check yes, because now they had no before because maybe they had no AAC device, but now you need to check yes. Or maybe the kid didn't use text-to-speech before, but they didn't understand it or they just didn't need it, but now the team's like, or you know, it's a learning disabled kid who you never considered it before, but you're like, maybe Susie needs to be using text-to-speech. That might help her, and the team trialed it and it's successful with her. You need to get in there and revise that IEP and check that box. Do a revision. Don't wait till the annual IEP if it's in the middle of the IEP year. Because a lot of times when AT gets trialed or the starting process is kind of at the annual IEP. Well, don't wait if you trialed a couple of things and it's 3 months later and you found something that works, revise that IEP right away. Don't wait till the annual IEP to add the AT in. And then I said, keep it no. Suppose you know it's an annual IEP and you know you're thinking you want to trial something with this kid, but you're not sure. Like you think text-to-speech could, I keep saying, yeah, you think text-to-speech is going to work for this kid and might be good for this student, then you can, but you're not sure which text-to-speech options are going to work for them. You can leave it no for now because you don't know if that's going to work for them or not. You would just document the trial and the IEP. And again, I'm going to get into that in a little bit. And I talk very fast. So if I'm going too fast or you need something explained, or you want me to elaborate, please just say something because I am kind of fast. Documenting no. Usually now I'm going to guess, and maybe not all of you, but I totally did this. And like I said, I worked in schools 19 years. If I check no, I didn't document that. However, I'm going to recommend you should, and here's some ways you should maybe do it. Because again, I came from a district where if we check no for the blind, the vision, and the ELL part, we still had to put it in the IEP why we check no, but we didn't for AT, which always seemed odd to me. I would suggest don't check no without including a statement as to why you put no. Again, think about covering your bases. This IEP goes to court. Make sure you can document, well, you check no on AT. Why don't you consider text-to-speech or whatever? You want to have an explanation in there. I'm going to give you some examples. You do not have, these are not like set in stone. This is what you must write. These are just ideas I came up with of how I've suggested a team of how they could document it. You can word it however you want, but I would just say, put a statement in your present levels. So these are some examples. You know, Susie does not require assistive technology devices or service to make sufficient progress in the curriculum or on her IEP goals. That's it. You don't have to explain it anymore. But again, you have a kid, you know, she's just a student who has a bunch of speech sound errors and maybe some grammar errors, or a student who just, you know, needs some math support, then you can just put that statement in there just so they know, yes, you check no, and it's in your present levels to back up why you said no. Here's just another example. Present level data and progress monitoring indicate, you know, student is making sufficient progress without assistive technology. AT supports are not needed in the IEP. And that can certainly change at any time. Something could happen and the student may need AT where they don't need. I had a student who was a speech only student, and I think I had him for 2 years, and then he started losing his hearing and they had no idea why, and he ended up having to get hearing aids and a FM system. So he never had AT checked because he didn't need it before. But then all of a sudden we had to change it. So again, it's not like it stays no. Once you check no, it's not a permanent situation. You can always change it to yes. And just because it's yes doesn't mean it won't go back to no at some point if they don't need it anymore. But again, I highly suggest, and I'm guessing most people probably aren't doing this, but I have encouraged IEP teams just to cover your bases, put that in there. And also if you put no, if you're doing a device trial also, of course you would put that in your present levels. And this is on the next page. I got ahead of myself, excuse me. So some ideas of what your present, so if you're doing it, you say, you know what, let's try AT with this kid, but you want to document in the IEP. I know when I went out and did, you know, personal consults and stuff, we kind of changed our model, but like 2 years ago, I'd read the IEPs, there would be nothing in the IEP about indicating the kid needed AT or that AT should be trialed, nothing in the present levels. There needs to be something in there about AT trialing. So here's some suggestions of what you may wish to include. Baseline data showing skills or a skills gap or the need for the devices, or to consider it. You know, this student was doing okay, but now with the science and social studies text and the articles they're reading online, she can't read them. I think she needs some kind of text to speech to read out loud. That way she doesn't have to have, for example, you know, I don't know what they call them in your district. I just came from a district where they're called paraprofessionals, but you know, paraprofessionals reading articles and reading texts and things out loud to kids in class. There are technology options so that paraprofessional can spend her time maybe doing other things. That would be an example of a time maybe you want to trial some AT to see if there's some text to speech that would work for those kids. So again, document that in the IEP and why. Or another example, and this happens a lot, I'd say with your AAC kids, they have a device, maybe they're using a Go Talk 20, but it is no longer meeting their needs. You need to document why, you know, maybe not enough vocabulary, for example. Document why it's no longer effective or meeting their needs and why you want to try something new. You know, maybe they're on a Go Talk 20, they're great, and they need more vocabulary. They need, you know, a dynamic display, something that, you know, something that to justify why you want to try something different. The SET framework, I did put a hyperlink in there. It forces you to make a copy, but that's an LIU SET framework that I've shared with teams. You can certainly use your own, but if the team has worked together on a SET framework, I'm not going to get into what that is if you don't know, but it's something you should use anytime you're considering assistive technology for a student. The student, environment, tasks, and tools, summarize that information into your present levels because that will help justify your AT trial. And we talked about SDI before. I'm going to talk about specific to SDI for AT. You want to put something in the SDI. I will tell you, I have put this in many an IEP and SDI. Trial of high-tech AAC apps for communication. Just because that's something they're getting that they weren't getting their IEP before, or trialing. So just, you could put that as an SDI. And then I would put, like, for the duration, something like for my AAC trials, like a minimum of 6 weeks per AAC option trialed, or something like that. Or, you know, something like that. I would put, you know, if that doesn't make sense, you could, oh, I don't know why that just did that. I was having issues with this the other day, with slides doing this. I don't know what that is. Okay. Sorry about that. Move on to the next page. Documenting yes. Again, we talked about how ways you want to document no. Usually we don't document anything. I'm not saying everybody does that, but a lot of people don't document anything for no. So I gave you some ideas of how to start documenting those no's. Again, just you want your IEP to be as legally defensible and as thorough as possible. Documenting, yes. And again, PA has no precedent. These are my suggestions that can help you. All right. So yes, and we talked about why you would check yes, how you would document. Obviously, if the AT supports are being effective, you can just say that. You know, they're using Clara Reed to read, you know, websites, and it continues to, you know, Susie continues to be successful being able to read articles online using that Chrome extension. Another place you want to document yes, other than in your present levels, or again, we also said if you trial the device and now yes, you want that AT in place, you got to obviously say that new AT is effective based on the device trial. But another place to think about it, documenting yes, is in your state and local assessments. Now, obviously our state assessments, our PSSAs and our PASAs, they're somewhat restricted, and you'll have to look in the guidelines because they change every year as to what is allowed and what is not allowed. But document any AT supports that are allowable in your state or local assessments. I find local assessments tend to be a little more flexible with that, but sometimes your PSSAs and PASAs, they have pretty stringent criteria. So I can give an example of what that would look like. I had a student who was an auditory scanner, and she couldn't take the pass. She couldn't take the pass where, you know, you're touching the right answer. Somebody had to verbally name them, and she had to hit the switch to choose which one she wanted because she did not have the motor skills to physically reach out and pick. That was documented in her IEP that she needed that accommodation. Or under a local assessment, you may even put, suppose you have a kid who needs a slant board and a pencil to write, and they're at, I don't know if you use DRA 2s, some districts don't. I came from a district that did. You know, they're at the written comprehension part. Well, you know what? It's always better to, if when in doubt, put it in there, cover your bases. Student must have a slant board and a pencil grip for legibility of, you know, their DRA 2 responses or something. If you're not sure, and they are using something, you're better off putting it in there than leaving it out. And in your specially designed instruction, listing of the AT supports and their purposes. One caveat, you might want to avoid specific brand names. Typically districts don't prefer if you don't do that, and rather describe the type of AT. For example, instead of saying they're using Clara Reed Chrome extension, say they're using text-to-speech device, you know, text-to-speech. And that way the kid moves to a different district where they don't use Chrome extensions. They can use, maybe they use iPads, they can use Speechify or some other text-to-speech on a different tool. I would say the one exception would be AAC devices, especially if it's one owned by the family. You know, the family owns a Tobii Dynavox with eye gaze. You can list that student has Tobii Dynavox with eye gaze for communication provided by the family. I usually try to add that little wording in there just so they don't think that, so that if the student moves to a new district, they don't think the district bought it. They know the parents own it. That's the only time I might list a specific device. So what might it look like in the IEP? This is an annotated IEP, and this, again, underlined blue, it's hyperlinked, so you can access it. This is not the end-all save-all. It's not perfect, but I just want to show you what some of those things I talked about could look. And this is just the blank IEP digitally from Patton, and then I put some annotations in it. Okay, so obviously you don't have anything in the IEP until we get to the special considerations page. And what I kind of did is I put it in red, and I know, and things are highlighted yellow. From an accessibility standpoint, that is terrible. I should probably change that because that's not really easy to read. But I tried to just reiterate the information in the presentation. You can take this annotated IEP and download it and save it if that's a little bit easier than going back through a slides presentation. But again, I highlight it, checking yes, no. This is all that we talked about. And then in our present levels, again, I discussed exactly what I had just reviewed with you in the presentation about present levels. I have some questions to consider and what they might need AT for. So those are just things you might not be thinking about. Okay, if they need AAC, the team's probably well aware that they need it. But again, what about participating in the gen ed curriculum? You know, so many times, oh, they can't read their tests. They can't read their social studies book. They can't read their science books. Well, then they could benefit from AT. So they might need that to be in those gen ed classes. So again, anything in red there, and I apologize if you have visual issues and can't see that. I did not talk about this in my presentation. I'm sorry, I neglected that. Transition students for 14 and older, you may need to include their AT in there if it's related to your, post-secondary, they're going on to some post-secondary education, if they need it in their employment, or if they need it for independent living activities, then you need to put it in there. Again, thinking of your kids who use AAC devices. It doesn't matter if they're in college, if they're at home, if they're on a job site, they need that AAC device. It needs to be somewhere in this section. Or college, if they're, if they're using some accommodations for writing, they're typing their notes instead of handwriting their notes, for example, again, you may want to include that in there in the secondary, in the transition. I already talked about states and local assessments. Here's with accommodations and where you'd list them. But again, you need to look, the PSSA and PASA accommodations differ slightly year to year. I'm sure they'll change again next year with everything. And again, now your local assessments, list any of them under the assessment accommodations. It says we'll participate. Okay, we'll participate with the following accommodations. List them underneath. Your IEP goals, and I will tell you, I often did not include them. Maybe, underneath you can put like SDI related to that, specific for that goal. But I might word in my, annual goal, I might list, when using their communication device, blah, blah, student will, in a 15-minute data point, will make 10 different requests to, or whatever, I don't know, whatever. But you may have that in the IEP if it's relevant, or, when provided with a graphic organizer, the student, prior to writing, the student will. So these are sort of examples of what it might look like in the different domains. So if you have a reading, listen, comprehension goal, you might have something in there about audiobooks. Again, because maybe they're not reading the book, they're doing comprehension with audiobooks. Again, word prediction maybe. When using word prediction and spell check to do a writing piece, student will, you may want to put it in there. Calculator, speech to text. So this is not meant to be a comprehensive list. I'm just giving you some examples. Your SDI related services. Again, I kind of tried to group them by category, and I reiterated not giving, excuse me, I've been talking too much. My voice is not good. I'm just listing some examples here of what, just some, this is certainly not a thorough list of what AT might be in the SDI that the student is using. Another thing I do want to say, and again, this is from, you don't have to do this, but, well, this is typically recommended. If you're putting AT, I'm going to scroll back up here. I don't want to make you dizzy. If you're putting they need certain AT in the local assessments, make sure that matches what's in their SDI. Don't put it in a local assessment and don't have it under SDI. Have it in both places. So if they need, a certain accommodation, excuse me, that's allowable on the assessment, have it documented SDI and in local assessments. Don't just put it in one spot. I would kind of cover your bases for those, especially for the PSSAs, because there's certain accommodations that are allowable in certain sections of the PSSAs. Document in your SDI that they need it, but then also put it in the state assessment section, your PSSA or PASA kids. Related services, you may have something there that you may, again, you're not going to necessarily have, you won't have AT specifically listed there, but your speech, your OT, your PT, those folks may be involved in AT, your OTs with the fine motor difficulties, your physical therapy for the kids who have physical impairments, your SLPs with your AAC kids. They may get those services, but they may not. But you would just document, you wouldn't write anything specific to AT in that section. You may want to put something in, for supports for school personnel. Again, staff trainings. For example, suppose you have a kid who gets a new AAC device, they get an accent an Accent 1000 from Prenke Rodent Company, and you want Kirk Benke, our local representative, to come out and do a staff training on that device, which is free because the kid owns the device, you might want to put that in there. Or even if you want like me to come out and do some kind of, I did many trainings last year. LAMP implementation was a hot topic last school year. That's an AAC app. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's for communication. You may want to put something like that in the IEP under supports for school personnel. You know, school staffs, the support would be training in LAMP, you know, location, you know, school, that kind of thing. And we don't know the frequency, once, and then when you think that's going to occur during the IEP year. But then, of course, if you do put that and you want me to come out and do a training, you need to put in a request, because obviously I'm not going to know you wrote it in there. You write it in. If you write it in there and you need me to come out and do a training for your staff, you need to put in that request form, which is on my IU page, which I can show you once I'm done with this presentation in the interest of time. Any AT, I didn't put anything under extended school year there, but obviously these something in the school year, they're going to need it during ESY also, likely. And that's all where the AT is in the IEP. So I'm going to close that out. I do want to talk about AT evaluations, just because, again, this is coming up. I feel like I never heard of this, and then all of a sudden it's coming up and up and up again and again and again. Legally, you do not need a formal evaluation to be eligible for AT supports. You don't need to do an AT evaluation because it has to be considered for everyone. Again, not every kid's going to get everything considered, but you have to consider AT for everyone. So you don't need an evaluation, or you're going to be evaluating every kid on your caseload to see if they need AT or not. So that is one huge reason why you don't need that formal evaluation. You can trial AT anytime without an evaluation, without a permission to evaluate, as long as you document it in the IEP, whether you do it at the annual IEP meeting or the team does a revision and adds it. Just document it in there, because AT needs to be considered for everyone. You do not need an evaluation. You don't do an evaluation to determine eligibility for AT. It's just not how it works. Using the phrase AT evaluation, I consider a misnomer a little bit, because it's not like your speech eligibility or your OT eligibility, where I'm giving standardized tests. They either, you know, and I gave 3 different language processing tests, and their standard scores were in the 60s in all of them. Okay, you know what? They're significantly below average for the age. They can qualify for that services. You can't give a test to say, this kid qualifies for AT, this kid doesn't. There's tools you can use that look at AT that you know, but they're not evaluations. There's not standardized evaluations. Are there tools you can use? Absolutely. If you have to do an evaluation and you need ideas of AT tools, I can certainly suggest them. But sometimes no objective data is collected during the during consideration for AT. There should be, but sometimes there is no data. There's no diagnosis. If I wrote a permission to evaluate for a kid and I wanted an AT evaluation, which I've seen many PTREs, they typically are, because the kid's already diagnosed, it has to be diagnosed with a disability. But it's not like it's going to change, you know, the checkbox. They're still going to be learning disabled whether they get AT or not. It doesn't result, if you just give an AT eval, there's no diagnosis that comes out of it, because it's supporting students who have disabilities. There is no change of placement that results from it for AT. It is not a standalone service. You cannot have an IEP for AT only. I do have a hyperlink to the RR, just talking about some of those sections I just referred to, like the drag boxes and the check boxes again, just in case you needed to refer to that. This is just an article I also linked on AT assessment and some things, again, some things you can do and look at, again, some ideas of what you can do if you need to. Again, an assistive technology assessment is basically device trialing. That's what it is. You're not going to give a test. And this is what I'm finding. Again, I said this before, a permission to reeval is not needed to consider a trial AT. That doesn't mean your district's not going to make you do that, but it's not legally required. I have found from my experience, usually anytime there's an AT evaluation on a permission to evaluate, it's because a parent demanded it or a parent's lawyer demanded it. And that's fine if that's how it's done. But I'm saying if just as a team to trial or consider AT, it is not necessary. Now, I will point out that if a permission to reevaluate is administered and somebody, a parent or a lawyer or even a school team or a special ed director is requesting an AT evaluation for a student, we do offer independent school evaluations for AT. It is a fee-based service. This is a hyperlink right to the form to make that request, but it's very specific. The only people who can request this, the current fee for last year was $85. And I don't know what it would be for this year, but it just talks a little bit. We would write a report, we would go to the meeting, but only certain people can request this. Again, there's a bunch of questions you have to ask. This needs to come from your LEA. Right there. This form may only be completed by the LEA. So for example, your director of special education or your special education supervisor, that's who needs to fill this out. Because if the permission comes in that says that, or the team decides we want to fill that out, again, you do not need to have the IU come out to do an AT evaluation. The team in-house, if you get a request for an AT evaluation, your in-house team can do that. If you need help on how to do that, if you those in-house, that's a training I can certainly provide. I know there was I did a training like that for Waynesboro last school year because they were getting a lot of these requests, and I met with the speech and OT and I gave them some guidance as to what they can do when they get these kind of requests. But if your team doesn't want to do that or don't feel qualified and wants to pay the IU to do that, that is an option for you. Okay, that's all I am presenting on today. Does anybody here have any questions or comments about what I discussed that they would like to share, or any concerns? Again, if your special ed director tells you specifically to do something different, you're going to have to kind of do what they do. Do what they tell you to do. For example, like the PTEs and those kind of things. Are you guys documenting 18 your IEP for the kids you check no on? Probably not. Yeah. So that's just something I would suggest doing. Again, you know, if you're not administration, you could just, you know, you may want to check with your supervisor and say, hey, I heard this. What about we start putting it in there? Because it's kind of like a cover your butt type of thing to do, to say, to prove that you considered it. Are there any questions or comments? If not, everybody's probably getting hungry. It's almost lunch. I wish there were lunch breaks that weren't 15 minutes long. But now this will give you a little bit of time before the next sessions. Please be sure to fill out the evaluation. Talk about this session. Did it meet your expectations? How are you going to use or share? Hopefully there's information here you want to share. I was going to say, if you're a member of a district, districts done training on how to, asking me to do this type of training, you know, at a 1 hour in service. How do we document 18 IEPs? My services are free to the public school districts in the LIU footprint. I can gladly come out and do this kind of training for staff. What key information resonated with you? There's our day 3 schedule. And don't forget to fill out that evaluation before July 31st for you, so you get your free book, because we all like freebies. If you don't have any questions, then you are free to get a little break before our 12:15 sessions begin. Thank you.